This TIVATE session is brought to you by the Contemporary Archive Project and supported by the National Arts Council. I'm this episode's host. My name is Sibusiso Gcaba. Enjoy Cedric Nunn's presentation on the margins.
My name is Sibusiso Gcaba. I'm a photographer based here in Johannesburg. I spent some time with Cedric during our mentorship with the Tierney Fellowship from 2022 late year. So we're very excited about this. I think people are very hungry for this presentation, Cedric. How are you doing on your side?
All good, man. Good to see you, and good to be finally doing this thing.
Yes. I'm also very glad, and I'm sure I don't want to waste much of your tagline, marginal lines. Is it possible that you can maybe explain it to us? What does it mean to you, and how does it relate to the work you've been creating all these years?
Sure, I think that's a good place to start. I think it goes back, obviously, to the bad, dark old days of apartheid, which is where I was born into, and that's where I emerged as a photographer. So, we were the marginalized back then, and so that's always been a major sort of alignment or perspective that I've emerged from. And not to say that one embraces the marginal, because when I began becoming a photographer, I was part of the alternate media. I wasn't able to be part easily of the mainstream media, so I was part of the alternate media, which is, in a sense, the marginal, right? So the alternate is meant, in our perspective, the alternate was our mainstream view. But in terms of the ecology of media, we were the alternate. So the same applies to society, I think, that, Black people are the majority, but we are still the marginal. And the reason for that, I think, is precisely because we don't have economic power. So that economic power defines society entirely. Politics is meant to facilitate that shift from the marginal to the mainstream. It's been hamstrung, in my opinion. So that might give, hopefully that gives a perspective on why I refer to the marginal. It's an acknowledgement of where we are, the majority of people are in South Africa today. I hope that's answered your question, Sibusiso.
Apologies. You can continue, please. So sorry for disturbing there. There's a lot of a bit of a delay between me and you. So
yeah, I can hear you breaking up as well a bit, unfortunately. But I can hear you. I can comprehend.
Okay, no problem, sir. Let me just let you do your presentation. I think everyone has been waiting for that. I'll switch off my video here. I think we're ready to see the presentation. But I think that you made a very interesting point. I thought it was important for you to go deep into that so that people can have a better understanding of their work before you even present. But I'll hand over the ropes to you.
And hopefully, Sibusiso, as I do the presentation, there'll be more clarity from the images that I present. So, so I'm going to hit share, and I'm going to get into the, thanks, Sibusiso. I will talk later. Or please, I also want you to interject whenever you feel, if you feel that you have a question or some clarity or whatever along the way, please feel free to speak while I do the presentation. Okay.
No problem. Thank you very much for do so.
Okay, can people see my shared screen now?
I can, yes.
Okay.
Yes. I can also see from my side.
I'm trusting somebody will indicate if they're unable to see it. If you can, that's fantastic. We should all be seeing it now. So as Neve and Sibusiso understood, I chose to do quite, I think, I almost very seldom show images these days. I prefer to talk about photography more than just showing individual images. And as most of you know, I actually have a YouTube channel, which is Cedric Nunn Photo Talks, where I actually talk to images. So I'm doing this, showing these images on a presentation. I haven't actually ever done this, and so just bear with me. I've chosen to show quite a lot of images because what I've chosen to do is to work through kind of synopsises of my more important solo exhibitions. So the first one that you're seeing here is called Blood Relatives. And this wasn't actually my first exhibition. It was my second exhibition, but perhaps my more well-known one, if you can look at it that way. The interesting thing about why I'm showing Blood Relatives first is because I spent a huge amount of time producing it. From the beginning, it was an idea I had from the very beginning that when I came into photography in 81, 82, to do this, to use photography in a way to explore this identity issue that I was grappling with as a young person becoming politically conscientized through the Black consciousness movement, and even before that, through the Black Power movement in the US, through negritude in West Africa, through through Black Power, as I said, in the Black Panther movement, and so I was grappling with this term that had been given to us by the apartheid state as colored, and the separate identity that separated us. So this project was a means of dealing with that. And one of the reasons it took so long is that I kept picking it up and dropping it. At some point, I would think perhaps it's not important enough. And then others, I would be distracted by the struggle and other stuff. There were bigger issues to deal with. So it only manifested in 2005, which is when the show was first presented at Constitution Hill Gallery, which I forget the name of, in Constitution Hill. And I will start going through it now. So you see that what I chose to do is to work with my family. I at first started out wanting to look at all colored people, but it was clearly, I didn't have the means. That's always the big problem in photography, is the means to, people like us are marginalized financially, resource-wise. So I chose, my mentor, in fact, advised me to look at my family. And I have quite a large, unusual family, which I won't go into right now. So these are this is the same place as the first image. And it was the kind of a nexus for me, this place, because it was the last surviving home of an ancestor, John Donne, who had lived in the 1800s. And I'd always wanted to visit this place, and it was quite a remote setting. And somehow it just felt, this is the back of the same house. It felt the same. So these are relatives. These are all cousins that I was photographing. And I was fortunate because it was very early in my career, as you can see, 1982, to be given images like that. This is a much later image in the same community, as you see in Mangeta. And you'll see, I have some images of other family members of this. We are, this is a rural community where almost everybody's related, very weird, in a very weird, because we share this ancestor from the 1800s who had many wives and many children. So this is actually our family store. I live in the store now. I'm repurposing it as a kind of studio apartment. And in 85, it was going through this. This was actually a cousin from my mother's side, Cedric Nunn, named after me, I believe, who had considerable artistic skills as well. Not like so many of us, not realized, except on the back walls of obscure rural trading stores. So somebody else I photographed a lot in this journey was, and there was became a central focus for me, was my grandmother. Cedric Nunn and I related by this lady, who was 101 years old here, now bedridden, in her home near Nongoma, and where she'd lived all her life. And I found her to be a fascinating person when, in my conscientized youth, in my 20s, living amongst Zulu people and as the only colored person living there, and totally integrated into the community. So I subsequently realized that I photographed her for the last 25 years of her life, and it makes her one of the most photographed Black women in South Africa, probably in Southern Africa, who has been photographed for that extent of time, like as a documentation. So that's a project that's emerging of, she's now late, obviously, but that's a project that's a separate project that I'm working with a colleague to eventualize. So this is back in Mangeta, and you can see the kind of conditions that people lived in there. You know, most people, not everybody, but most people were quite impoverished, and yeah. Again, back to my grandmother, her kitchen. This is quite a well-known image now. That kind of shows, you know, her sort of indigenous Zulu cultural identity, as well as a kind of Afrikaner settler, pioneer, I don't know, you know. So this goes back to Mangeta, and this is Lena Hartley. You saw her son earlier on. And that image up on the top, that's the ancestor that binds us all. That image is to hang in every house. And everyone said, they're the Black woman. They weren't photographed, but he married. And that was her Hartley ancestor as well. And this house was also burnt down, so nothing remains of that. And I really lament not doing more images of the house. When you're young, you're quite foolish about the impermanence of things. So this is back in Mangeta again, somebody that I befriended and became very friendly with. This shows the hardship, you know, beautiful people subjected to hardship. And that's why, for me, you know, there's an urgency to, you know, you still find scenes like this. And this was obviously in 1986, back in the dark old days. This is back in the Nongoma area, Ceza, where the Low family come from. And this was my mom's cousin. And he only spoke Zulu. And a beautiful man living in this beautiful environment where the Low ancestors who were Dutch and came out in the 1800s, 1860s, and moved into this and married Zulu woman and lived in this region. So another pretty well-known image from the Mangeta area. I never photograph weddings commercially, but I tend to do them as gifts to family and chosen friends. So I'll do them gratis, you know, and this was one such wedding. she actually asked me to photograph in black and white. Otherwise, I might not have had this camera and captured it in this particular way. That background is now covered in houses. Things have changed, constantly changing. And so here we see the school that I attended, the school up here behind these trees. My primary years were spent in the school, and the changing face in 2001 of for a healthier South Africa. So that's just a glimpse into blood relatives. You can see more of the images on my website because, you know, that's the problem. There's an urgency to publish because when you produce an exhibition, it disappears when it comes down from the walls if it's not published. And the publishing ecology in this country, especially for photo books, is abysmal. We need to change that. And I have myself and colleagues are setting up an archive project that hopes to remedy that. So this was the first exhibition that I produced called The Hidden Years. This was exhibited in 1996, and its focus was only on KwaZulu-Natal and on this period from the early 80s, this kind of decade that led up to 94. And that I termed The Hidden Years because, you know, this was the marginal. This was these kind of images, you know, unless they were taken by, you know, people like myself, the small band of documentary photographers, you didn't see this kind of image making. You know, people having to walk to work because the wages that they earned, there was so little that, you know, they needed to save as much as their salary as possible. And in some ways, not much has changed. I focused again in 1982. I started off focusing on, you know, what was at hand. Housing was a major issue for colored people in Durban. There were no housing. It began soon after that, you know, the state felt a sense of urgency to provide housing for Black, colored Indian people. And so this was a huge, it looks pretty posh, but it was a huge kind of tenement style apartment block full of social issues, you know. And so me there trying to, actually had a cousin that lived here, so I would visit him, hang out and meet people. Again, this is 10 kilometers from where I am now, and Mandini, and the Isitebe border industry, the image that you saw earlier of the workers going to work, that one. So these are located in the same area. And, you know, coming from the workers' struggle myself, I was attracted to subject matter like this. I spent 8 years as a worker, went on strike, you know, was involved in the workers' struggle in my factory that I worked in for 8 years. This image is taken also maybe about 10 kilometers away from where I am now. My dad took me to this place for the first time to show me. I mean, in '83, I was, I don't know, 27. So, you know, this was an out of the way place that was off the map. I visited regularly now. And I love this image because it's one of my favorite, because my dad was kind of flirting in a very innocent way with this young lady. And that was the occasion for her beautiful smile. Here we see the Gandhi Museum destroyed by violence. And these kids, displaced kids, also displaced by violence, you know, in a very makeshift environment in this Gandhi Museum. So that was the dark days that we went through in '87, as you can see there. This again is, so much of this is family. This is where my dad's family came from, in this horizon here, those hills. My dad's family came. I spent a lot of my childhood here visiting my grandmother, and there was a diminishing colored community here because apartheid displaced the colored. This was tribal reserve, and the apartheid state said there is no place for colored people, they need to leave. So that a very vibrant, thriving community left. I was baptized in this church. This is a new iteration of that church, the shadow that you see here, beautiful stone building, Catholic church. And people read all sorts of different things into this image. You know, religious people are attracted to it. I don't think I was saying the same thing that day. I have a rather jaundiced view of religion. I consider myself spiritual, but religion are complex beings that are often are compromised. So here we see back to the violence in '87, the very effective technique of stay away that was forcing the government to deal with its need for change in the country. And unfortunately, the government's response was to sponsor proxies, and which resulted in huge amounts of violence and displacement, as we see here as the proxy war gathered speed. We see it playing out in the rest of the world because it's the same vested power interests who have the same playbook. They do the same thing of, I am an activist photographer. This is my orientation. This is where the lens through which I see things. The pain and suffering of people, we are seeing it in Gaza right now. We didn't see a fraction of what is being experienced in Gaza or what people experienced in Mozambique. There was a horror story that took place in Mozambique and Angola. Again, proxy wars to keep people subjugated so that they can extract the raw materials and blunt any kind of orientation towards socialism or being people orientated. So people paid the price. This is one moment, the same funeral, and people's cry to stop the killing. And the interesting thing about this image was that this young man, this township, Mpopomeni, outside Howick, was the location for one of the longest strikes in South African history, fierce resistance. The Psalm called BTR strike, in 13 years strike in South Africa. And the youth organizations were working closely with the trade unions as well. So that's the same, these two young men, comrades that were being buried here, who were abducted and murdered. The many thousands of people who were murdered in our struggle for liberation. And again, this is a BTR, this is the Psalm called Workers' Strike. They had a collective that kept them going in many different ways, producing T-shirts, agricultural food distribution. And one of the things was plays. It's a sad thing that the workers' movement's plays have all but disappeared, because this was an educational tool, both for the workers and for us, to understand the struggle and the nature of the working class struggle. So here we move on to Johannesburg. This was a kind of a commissioned exhibition. I worked on it for about 6 months. I had to be, I had to have security in 2000 already. I insisted that the security be plainclothes because Johannesburg was that dangerous already back then. I think it was its most dangerous as it transitioned from the city was built for white people to extract wealth. And there was no place really for Black people in the city. I lived in the city here somewhere when I first came to Johannesburg, and at night, this was a ghost town. The city, Hillbrow would be alive, but the rest of the city was absolutely scary to be in. It was, and in the morning you would see blood trails and things like that. So that's the, I'm talking about the early 80s here. So this is Johannesburg. A disclaimer, the personal is also political. Around 2000, I was going through separation, divorce, very depressed about things. And so a lot of these images reflect that kind of depression. Also, maybe to trying to understand what was happening in the city that I'd grown to love, this city, and it was a kind of deconstruction that you see happening in this image of these young artists. This was an arts workshop in the Braamfontein area. Braamfontein has always had its kind of affinity with the arts. And that's, I think, is a Transnet building, very apartheid structure, fascist, German fascist design, in my opinion. Not that I know much about architecture. So here are people trying to humanize the city of Johannesburg. This was a coffee shop just opposite the courthouse, and it stayed alive for a while because the lawyers and barristers and whatever you call them, attorneys and all that, frequented this coffee shop. And yeah, people are, we're at the beginning of that process of trying to humanize this city that was not built really for humans to be living in. In the same way that, you see here, this indigent person, quite rightly tuned in, tuned out and tuned in. And so, I don't know, I was attracted to these kind of images of this, again, people coming in from God knows where to try and find a foothold in the cities, because the countryside was harsh back then. It still is rather harsh now, but far more harsh then. So, people trying in their own ways to make sense of the city in this way, the harshness of the city. That's Braamfontein across the way, and the edginess of Johannesburg. And so here you see, people coming. This is Park Station. God knows where this man came from, where he's gone to, where he is now. But this was the port where people came through from all over Africa, coming to the city of gold, to panda. As you see this young man, you still need to panda. You need to have good pandering skills if you want to make it in the city. But we also need these skills. So, they used to say that if you want to hide information from a black man, put it in a book. No longer the case. Black people are producing books like in industrial scale, and we read that shit. So this is an inner city park. So I go on to here. This was a mid-career, what I call a mid-career retrospective. I was very fortunate to, around about a year or two before this, to hook up with the gallery. I'm not with the gallery now, but I was approached by a German gallery that was that came and spent some time in South Africa, the Zypo Gallery. And one of the things we did was to produce I did a few exhibitions with them, but to produce this mid-career retrospective that looked at 30 years now, a span of 30 years of my career. And so, in the gallery, the publication, I'll just show it to you because you need to see it's available in the KZNSA gallery. This publication was made possible but through a German publisher. It was impossible to publish, still is pretty much impossible to publish in South Africa, just because of the cost and the ecology, as I call it, the financial ecology of publishing here. So very fortunate to produce this exhibition, and there there's about 120 images in the exhibition. I'll just show you about 10 here. I lived in Brixton when I first came to Johannesburg in '83, and I would walk through this page view in these areas, and that gave me the opportunity to see this aspect, the final aspects of this separate development and forced removals and the breaking up of communities to suit some sort of ideological spatial development that was just a disaster for Black people. So I ended up focusing, you'll see more images along the way on this issue, because around 3 million people were forcibly removed and displaced. And displacement is, if you haven't chosen to do it, it's a very disruptive thing. This image is of my brother, Preston, and my brother-in-law. And he's just moved into a council house. And so this was the beginning of the state trying to now respond to working class people and provide housing for them. So, I'm a struggle photographer, but these are humane moments. There's not a clenched fist available anywhere here. A big issue for me in KwaZulu-Natal is this of the sugar industry. I think it's still the cornerstone industry in this province. And the sugar industry is a feudal industry. It is really, I'm surrounded by it, implicated in it, in fact. And it's an industry that is destroying for people. It makes wealth for very few people, and the rest of the people live on the margins, And so, we still need to break free of these chains. This is an image I did. I worked, disclaimer, I worked for a publication called Clarion Call. I actually worked for the KwaZulu government in 83, mandated by my organization, Afripix, to do coverage from, because I spent some time back in this province in this period, 85, 86. So I was an official photographer here, and you can make of it what you will of this image, or this one. Similar kind of moment, bureaucrats in this homeland government. So back in Mdini, I was here as a my good friend was here as a guest, and he invited me to come along with him. So I was privy to this very intimate moment, beautiful intimate moment, in this very informal setting. This has all been now formalized into township housing. And again, Mdini, the paper mill, that the townships are all downwind from this toxic paper mill. And this rugby field from 1986 is now a soccer field. Back to the sugar industry and migrant worker, because most Zulu people won't work in this industry. They're men, or they are not meant. They're not culturally. I don't know how many Zulu men understand this. They rear cattle. They're cattle breeders. The famous Nguni cattle are raised by Zulu men, and a woman. So my great grandfather had the first license to import Mozambican people into this province for the sugar industry in the 1800s. He made a lot of money doing that, did it very effectively. So a lot of, in fact, in the north coast of Zululand, a lot of people who think they are Zulu now actually have Mozambican ancestry. I don't know how many know that. But as you can see, this is, I think, probably a Mpondo guy, very lonely, away from home, in this harsh job, with very little feudal environment. Again, the sugar industry. And again, I try to humanize, people who, through no fault of their own, are subject to this brutality. In Durban, this is one moment, these two images. And so these women would come out from the South Coast, deep rural South Coast, and they were one big community, come and sell vegetables. And they all said they were doing it to educate their children. So in the morning, they would put on sunscreen, indigenous sunscreen, make themselves presentable, and come off this pavement and hit the pavements where they would stay for the day, trading vegetables. Tenant farmers were a huge issue in South Africa, all forcibly evicted off the farms, the land they were found on. And this was a huge issue, people often misinterpret this image, a woman surrounded by men. This is a beautiful African tradition of these elders hearing this woman's plight and providing solutions. And I want to return to this place when I finally find the resources and I can get near the Drakensberg, where these people were dumped, in some harsh environment. It's a beautiful place in the Drakensberg to visit and hike in, not so much to try and farm and make a living in, where you are like 40 or 50 kilometers from a workplace. Forced removals, Mahopa, very famous forced removal area where people fought against the forced removals, were removed and fought for the right to return. And this old man, you can see his dreams lie buried in that rubble. Again, we see this playing out in a much more brutal way now in Gaza. The kids of Mozambique, this was my first trip to Mozambique, 1990. It was still at war, Mozambique. And the big story there, although it wasn't just the only story, I went there with the Weekly Mail then, the preceder of the Mail and Guardian. And as a freelancer though. And again, people are resilient, and these kids had retained their humanity, and most Mozambicans I meet now, have survived that brutal war with their humanity intact, largely. Here, people trying to hold on to their indigenous cultures as they're removed and put in. There was a huge tent city. I have images of all of that. Outside Weenan. Weenan wasn't just a place of weeping for white people, but also for Black people as well. Or just trying to live this beautiful life that people can live in the countryside. That is the state made so hard for people. So here's my grandmother in her field in 1988 that made her 88 years old, peasant woman. Ulundi and Mahlabatini are on that horizon, over that horizon. And this was where she grew up and spent all her years. Yeah, resting outside of her after the labor in the fields. And I tried to begin photographing Wentworth. I didn't do that much. I actually backed down and let Peter do it. But I did do a few images, and this is one of the more well-known images because this is the ship that never sailed in Wentworth, the Sapref oil refinery that has been the cause for so much ill health of Wentworth people, respiratory diseases, and the like. So that's call and response. Let me just see how I'm doing for time. I don't have that much time. Move it up a little bit. In 2013, I produced an exhibition called 1913. I shot it mostly in 2012, 1913, to commemorate the Land Act. And I chose two areas to photograph: cornfields. With that, and a huge amount of photographing, because this is one of the areas that had resisted being forcibly removed. And I wanted to see how they were doing, this was, as I said, it was 2013. So it was 100 years, 100 years later, how they were doing after apartheid. And I found them in a bleak position where the state was doing very little to help them after all those years of fighting to remain in the land, to build, because they'd been hampered for decades, being seen as a black spot, and the state attempting to relocate them. And the other area was a place called Gongola, and which was quite close to Weenan, where the people had successfully won their right to return to land that they had been forcibly removed off of, and that had become white farmland. And now they were facing off with the government, who was trying, along with those previous white owners, trying to turn this into a game reserve, like a luxury eco lodge kind of, where they realized that they would just become lowly workers. And I don't know what's happened to that struggle. There's so many struggles still happening. So this is Gongola people wanting to farm themselves, and prosper. Just aspects of the kind of place that Gongola butts on. And I lived with this family. I was embedded through an activist, so billeted with this family for about a week. This is the one household, while I worked in this area, because these are remote. This is the activist I worked with. Sorry, I've lost his name, but he's quite a well-known activist from the region, working with the land, as you can see. Gongola again, and cornfields. I spent some time. This is the Induna of cornfields, and as you can see, he's at the graves of his grandfather and his father. And here he is with his title deeds for his land, because his ancestors, his grandfather bought this land before 1913. They bought this land probably in 1911 or 1912, understanding that this Land Act was going to come into place and to deny people the right to have land. And this land was able to produce fairly stable families, the stability that comes with the land ownership. So that is 1913. Round about this year, I had the opportunity to go to this place called Kweto Konavali. I paid a lot of attention to Kweto Konavali when this battle took place here in 1988. It was a major battle between the South African Defence Force, SWAPO, who was their proxy in Angola. This is in Angola. The FPLA, FPLA, I think it is, yes, the Angolan military, and the Cubans. And we're the South Africans, although this is a this is a Russian tank, the Cubans in that battle, the Cubans and the Angolans whipped, in fact, Mkonto was also involved in this battle, whipped the South Africans' ass. And they, when they lost that battle, the politicians realized that they needed to begin to negotiate. So 2 years later, Namibia was free and our political leaders were being released and negotiations were beginning to happen. But of course, it was also because the Soviet Union had fallen. So this is Angola, the remnants. This is aftermath, my beginning of aftermath photography, aftermaths of wars, just at a random roadside battle, you know, an ambush that had taken place. So that's the entrance to Kweto Konavali, and a site of a fierce battle. This is some scenes in Kweto Konavali that I photographed just to get this flavor of the people that live. This is a Catholic church service, beautiful service that I snuck into, and this is a clinic. I think things have prospered now. The state has brought huge changes to Kweto Konavali. I'd love to go back and see what has been done there. This is the clinic again. And in this cemetery, I was told that easily about 30,000 people lie buried in unmarked graves. And this was a cooperative that was now kind of a disco, because that's what neoliberalism does to us. It takes us from that, from being cooperative to, you know, Majaivan. And this was a functioning beauty salon. That's what this is. So then this was another commissioned exhibition called In Camera. It was done for a WITS based apartheid archive project, and I went to look at this current state, what the legacy of apartheid had left for us. So this is just around about 2009, as you can see. I actually brought my mom to this clinic, and AIDS was a huge issue. I'm not saying that this man had it, but it was. You'll see other images of that. I lived close to Richmond at this point in time, and when I learned that there was this memorial, I hunted for it. It wasn't that easy to find, and I visited it for several years. Found it in exactly this same condition until one day when I came, that beautiful bronze artwork done by a famous South African KwaZulu-Natal sculptor was gone, probably. So what a tragedy for this act of resistance, the Bambata Rebellion. Again, HIV/AIDS, the tragedy of HIV/AIDS, and how it reduced Black people primarily. Richmond, again, interesting thing about his Richmond is that it's forestry. These are forestry workers. And, after 94, one of the conditions of the neoliberal Washington consensus was that the forestry plantations were able to dismiss their workers and casualize them. And again, South Africans refused to work under those conditions, and those are mostly Lesotho migrants that work in these harsh conditions for a pittance. It's a bit like the sugar industry. It's a feudal industry. It benefits few. And so people, rural people are still condemned to be living like this. I find this beautiful if it can be built, with the right technology, this form. But, mostly these are damp houses that are not good for people's health to live in. And, Black people are still condemned to being polluted. This factory is now closed down. So it's this conundrum. First, they were being polluted and poisoned by the gases of this factory. Now they are being dying through unemployment, and because jobs are not that easy. And this township is just a gangster's paradise now with drive-by shootings, infested with drugs. So we need a new paradigm, people. We need a new paradigm. This remnants, this doesn't even exist any longer. This is not 500 meters from where I'm sitting right now. This woman was assassinated in this house. To this day, nobody knows who assassinated her. She was shot like at 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning, and the violence that this country has been subjected to. And this was another commissioned exhibition by I made some notes, but I actually can't find them. This was made by the Pietermaritzburg Agency for Community Social Action. I always struggle to say the words of this PEXA, what PEXA means. And they dealt mostly with people on the margins, people struggling. I'll read this for you here because this is Duduzile Gumede, age 64, a member of the Trust Feeds Widows Forum. Trust Feeds was a site of a big massacre in the struggle, the proxy war. Born in Mapumulu near Stanger, Duguza, she came to work in nearby Dalton, but was retrenched because of faulty eyesight in 2003. That was an excuse, and has been unemployed ever since. All Duduzile's 6 daughters have died, and she continues to support their 4 surviving children, including a 41-year-old son and his child. Duduzile buried her husband in 2007, although he had long absconded and lived with another partner. She had heard about his death on the radio. So this is in Trust Feeds. We need to move. We should be dwelling on that image, but we need to move along. And so PAXA worked a lot with the cost of food, and they lost that battle. The cost of food has just skyrocketed since. So I focused a lot on kitchens, and I love this kitchen. This was like a shrine, like how, if you read here, this kitchen feeds 19 people who live in, none of whom have employment, and you try to imagine how is that possible. So this is the same house, this beautiful attempt at being human, at holding on to culture and incorporating Western and indigenous cultures. And this bloody box gets in the way. Here again, kitchens, somebody renting this, Vivian Nyamenda renting this for 100 rands per month. She's been unemployed for 11 years. Her last job was a domestic worker, which she left because of the low wages. It's criminal. We have a slave wage. We are, one of the projects I'm working on now is slavery, because we have almost 200 years of slavery, and it's imprinted this kind of, we still are considered to be slaves, in my opinion. That's why this is possible. Again, this is 500 meters from where I live, this family. Timberlisha has passed on now, unfortunately. And these were regular people in my life in the times that I did live here in the past. So we come to Unsettled. It was quite a departure from the kind of work I did. I was struck when I learned that Eastern Cape had been subjected to a 100-year war, 9 wars over a 100-year period. And I was shocked that I didn't fully consciously understand it. And so when I began to research it and talk to people, I realized that everyone was as blank as I was about this extraordinary event. So I was very fortunate that I was able to produce this very difficult exhibition to produce with all the traveling. And you know how the generous people are with funding for traveling. There was not, I was able to, through the John Fleetwood at the Market Photo Workshop, through the French, this project called Transitions, to spend the first 2 weeks beginning this project. And that confirmed that this project needed to happen. And then I was very fortunate as well. The ancestors colluded and made it possible for me to get a 3 months Millen Foundation Senior Fellowship, Research Fellowship at Rhodes University with not a salary for 3 months, but the funding to travel for 3 months in this region and produce the work that I produced. So I will go through it quite. You can visit this in the gallery. These are the descendants. These are the fierce. The Ndlambes fought 5 of those 9 wars, and they live in poverty in the Eastern Cape, but they have their dignity intact. And so this is Nkosi Makinana with his counselor at the site of a place where they conducted embassies on the British. There are lots of this. The Eastern Cape has one of the highest concentrations of forts in the colonized globe around the world, in the US, wherever, India, wherever. And it was because of the resilience of these ancestors who battled for that century to and lost finally, because who could sustain that battle against a formidable foe as the imperialists are. So the Ndlambes claimed that this was the site of their great corral, and I believe them, because Grahamstown, if you know it, Makanda, is obviously they would put the cathedral there. Where this cathedral space is in a bowl. It's a very place. Even before the English came, there were Boers living here, and so the Boers might have displaced the Ndlambes already. It's a place that lends itself to human habitation in that windswept environment. This is a site of a massacre, and these are the tour guides that took me. They are tour guides, and that's how I came to this community. I found them on the internet, and I called up and went for a tour. And then I'll just tell you this quick story. I know we're running out of time. I must, sure, yeah. But I should tell you the story because I was, this wonderful woman, Miranda, said, look, the Nkosi needs to meet with you. You can't go on the tour until the Nkosi meets with you. So I was like, what the heck does Nkosi want to talk to me for? I just want to go on the tour. So anyway, I met with the Nkosi, and I met with him and all his counselors in his chambers, courthouse chambers. And I was interrogated. What are you doing? Who the heck are you? What's your interest? And I found myself disclosing that I was an 1820 settler. And I was like, what the hell have you just said? You are not going to go on this tour any longer. And he said, the ancestors have sent you. Go on the tour. So yes, the women and children were slaughtered here by British. It was only 70 years into that war that Xhosa began to attack civilians. And here is the site of the major battle, what Makanda is named after, led by this extraordinary character who Makanda was. I'm running out of time, so I can't tell you the incredible story of Makanda. Go and read, find out more about who this extraordinary man was. A statesman of the first order. The site of a mass grave from the Great Catholic killing, the starvation that when the Xhosa were engineered into destroying their economy. Economic warfare, it's a thing, which later undiscovered for. This is right in the heart of King Williamstown. And the Boer trek began from here when the British arrived and slavery was abolished. And this is a big monument that the Boers have. So it's all intertwined into that history. And also the Khoi. So this was a Khoi settlement. And the Khoi at first colluded with the British, but then 50 years later rose up with the Xhosa against the British when they realized that they had gone out of the frying pan into the fire with the British. And at this point, the Khoi had lost, they were just starting to flirt with Christianity because they had lost all their land in the Western Cape. They had been eaten up by the Boers. And they thought that the English would come were enemies of the Boers, but they found that this was a much fiercer imperial foe. So I didn't try not to focus on forts too much, but this was a fort that was actually captured by the Khoi captain, Matros Hermanus. And so this is part of a trilogy now that's with Unsettled. That I've shown this. I'm going to go through very quickly. This was towards the end. You know, an act of reclamation, a Khoi settlement next to what is called the castle, but it's actually a fortress. This is a fortress. Don't make any mistake about that. It's an act of intent to dominate the land. And the reemergence of the Khoi people, Anama, part of the Khoi people, heroic, incredible people, indigenous First Nation people, and what they can be dehumanized into, you know, the Bushmen. This was, again, close to Richmond, where I used to live. Beautiful man, now having to, you know, go through this charade of his culture. Beautiful thing that he does, actually. It's a gift to young people to give them some sense of, this is a place that young schools come to. And this is a Nottingham Hill, Notties. It's in the Midlands. It's a big place where, you know, bars and pubs and things like that, bed and breakfast. But Notties is actually named after Fort Nottingham, and it was the Nottingham Regiment that came here to annihilate the remaining Bushmen that were now ensconced in the Drakensberg, the nearby Drakensberg, and raiding, because they'd been denuded, they lost all their land, raiding the newly settled white farmers' cattle. So that's the legacy of this country. These people are the remnants of the Bushmen that were destroyed here when the Great Trek moved into this part of the Northern Cape and annihilated them and made them the lowest of the low in society as sheep shearers. Yeah, again, but there's the remnants of the Bushman people. Emerging, returning. The only monument to the genocide of the Bushmen. And look at the story state in Grafrenet. A sad story. This is you call her a chief, she's a headman, head lady, powerful, strong woman. I'm sorry I didn't get to interview her. Time was of the essence. She didn't quite know. She wanted to play it out a little bit. And now she's late, unfortunately. Hanki, where, I'm terrible with names, but you know, where the legendary woman is buried that was taken to and paraded in somebody will remind me. A Khoi community on the banks of the I should have had that in the caption, the name of the river. But another long story. I'm about to go off and photograph their relatives. This is in the Western Cape. They have relatives that they only realized that they had that live up in the Northern Province, the descendants of the legendary transfrontier man Kunrad de Base. So these two families were related. So this was the last exhibition that I did now, just it's actually on now in Durban, called Unseen. And this is actually just 10 years, my first 10 years of work, images that hadn't been shown before. So these are the kind of images. If you go to see that exhibition, you will see these kind of images from 86, that period. They could have been in the hidden years, I suppose, as well. Outtakes, you might call them. What people were subjected to back in the day before there was, right now they are paved taxi ranks, and we have a lot to be thankful for. There has been progress. And this is our past, the ridiculousness of making beaches for white-owned people. Again, this is a proxy war story. The attempts to remove people off land, indigenous people, and take them away from their cultural ways of living. They failed, actually. Again, workers' culture is powerful. I have quite a few of these pictures. And in Mpopomeni, the struggle. I've documented this for maybe 10 years of that, 13 years. And in fact, I've donated most of those pictures to the Mpopomeni Museum. And so these images are this is Wentworth again. And my colleague and late friend now, Pax Magwaza, extraordinary individual that I was fortunate to contribute to his exhibition. This was his exhibition in his township, Lamontville. And his legacy should never be forgotten. And my visit to Maputo in 1990, this is the last image. Quite a culture shock for me to see, how ocean people could, if they were left to their own devices, be ocean people. So I'll end it there. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to stop that share, and hopefully we have a better connection to you now, Sibusiso, and we can have a chance for a chat.
Thank you, Cedric. I know Sibusiso had some network issues. Is he here still? Our good old host is here, Sibusiso. Otherwise, I know a lot of people have to rush off, but maybe we can squeeze in a question or two. I don't want to let people miss out.
Excuse Candace, Sarah Bartman. That was Sarah Bartman. Candace, thank you. That's in Hanki.
If anyone would like to ask a question or put it in the chat, we'll maybe just take two. Raise your hand or just come alive with your microphone.
Harmonizing and humanizing. Well, you need to do a lot of harmonizing to become fully human. Thank you, Wandile.
Hi, Michael. Did you want to ask a question?
Yes. Hi, everybody.
Please go for it.
Okay. Hi, Cedric. Thank you.
Hi. Hi. Is that Motlebo?
It's such a privilege to see some of your aspects. Definitely. I just want to ask the question. What have you, if I can say, discovered about your heritage through your work thus far?
Eve, could you repeat that question? Maybe you heard it better than I did.
It was also a bit crackly. Do you want to type that out, Michael, or do you want to repeat quickly? I think your line. Struggling to hear. I think maybe put that in the chat, but we have two questions in the chat, Cedric, if you're able to read and maybe you want to respond. I think they're...
Yes, what made me switch from black and white to color in the 2000s, and what does Ubaba Cedric use black and white pictures It's really just a very simple reason. Back in the day, black and white was a black and white darkroom. You wanted, like, today you have Photoshop, and you can actually manage your images. You can work with the grading and all of that. The darkroom did the same. You produced a picture, and you could manipulate. You could work with the grading and maximize the effect of the image. Black and white darkrooms were fairly affordable, and color darkrooms were really not affordable for poor photographers like ourselves. And so we did a lot of our work in black and white. We also did color occasionally, but I suppose we had less control over the color, because when we did color, it went to a lab, so you didn't have control over it. So we kind of liked the idea of control, and we just became accustomed to working in black and white. And when color became more of a thing, I still struggle with color to this day, because I'm not a technical person. I'm not trained photographer either. So photography is a very technical thing, as you know. So the temperatures and all sorts of things to consider, light temperatures, which I'm ignorant of. So I do use shoot color, but my serious work I do in black and white, because it's just a medium I'm more comfortable with. So Michael Abrams, hi Michael, good to be connected to you again. How has your work contributed to your search for identity throughout the years? Well, if you see black blood relatives, it did that already back then, and it made me understand that I'm black, and I'm 50% Zulu, if you want to know, and 50% European. But I've been, although I'm present as colored, psychologically I choose not to buy into the notion of the separateness of the colored identity, and I respect anybody that wants to do that as well. This is my choice, and I think I have pretty good reasons for not go against the active divisions. Because, if you go to Mozambique, we are the only country in the world that has the separate entity of people who are hybridized. It's an active divide and conquer. So I refuse to subject myself to that. What are the travels?
Oh,
what
sorry.
are the travel? Oh, you go for it, Nick.
Sibusiso just reconnected, so I'm wondering if he wants to quickly contribute before we do our last questions, just so his voice is in the conversation.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, guys. I got disconnected. But Cedric, I just want to say thank you for the presentation, and also thanks again for being very generous with the images. I think some of us haven't seen some of the exhibitions that you had locally, internationally. The ones who are fortunate are the ones who were in Durban, who just saw your show at the Durban University of Technology. But thank you very much for being generous.
My pleasure.
With so many images and context also. Let's wait for people to ask questions, then we'll wrap it later. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's my pleasure, Sibusiso. And I see there's a question here. Maybe I can respond to this. What had the travels been motivated by? As a street photographer, it seems these days we are struck in city centers. As journalists seem to chase narratives to the far-reaching parts of South Africa and across borders. I'm a rural person. I grew up in rural KwaZulu-Natal, and that's my sensibility. And one of the things about being a photographer is that I don't know, when I was younger, especially, that was the case. It afforded me the opportunity to travel, and I've been to most parts of this country. And I consider myself very fortunate to have done this. Beautiful country, beautiful people in this country, very tragic as well. But if you see the beauty, I'm attracted to the beauty as well. So I'm curious. I want to go and see what's over that hill. Who lives there? How are they similar to me and different from me? So I did that more easily in the rural areas rather than the cities. The cities are, we all know the cities. The cities are they're easy to move around in. The rural areas are, you need to navigate your way into the rural areas. You can't just rock up and take out a camera and begin to work, But when you find, a lot of city people, for instance, I find go to the rural areas with this like city, because there's this other separate and divide acting that took place between urban and rural, where, urban people were the modern hip people, the country people were the pumpkins, Jim come to Joburg. And I experienced that as a person myself, And so to demystify that, because that's a part of dividing people, We are one people. Some of us are urban, some of us are rural. But you respect that Baba that you meet, or that Mama that you meet in the rural areas, because she's got smarts, trust me, that you would not survive in her environment if you were there. So I go in with that sense of humility and the desire to meet a human being that I know I can learn something from and benefit from and share as human beings share. Do I still make images? And if yes, why? Because they are so, there's a thing that's happened in South Africa where this kind of work that I do is passé. It means it's like past its sell-by date. It's, you must move with the times, you must be trendy, must be arty, whatever. No, I'm old school, I'm a traditionalist. And the response I get from people, the images that I do is so heart affirming and heartwarming that's what drives me to continue, but also to tell the stories of marginalized people, because who else tells these stories? Who else, in return, who else goes to Katrafir to photograph, Or I'm terrible with names. So the many, I'll be going to Basefontein, Base Plus. Who goes to Base Plus to actualize those people and put them in history, their place in history? I'm one of the few people that do documentary photographers like you and apps that do that. There's a question here earlier, if you could take. Can somebody just moderate these questions and maybe bring them to my attention, because I can't, otherwise I might just miss some important ones.
So I've pulled it to,
I'm sort of glancing at the side.
I can see that. So we have 2 more questions that have been waiting in the chat. If you wouldn't mind reading them and responding.
I would love to respond to them.
Yes, can you
Is this the one that I see here?
Yes, if you could
take back time, what would you do differently regarding your work? What I would do differently is I would be more of a documentary photographer. I would photograph, I was trying to be a Cartier-Bresson when I was young, the decisive moment, looking for that moment. No, photograph what you see. That's so important, to keep a record of what you see, because things, especially in this neoliberal modernizing world, things change so fast that 40 years is not a long time. Okay, I'm a Madala now. Yeah, it's true, but it's not a long time. And I would have been so much more diligent had I been aware of how I needed to actually be a documentary photographer. You raised something very important with your statement that most Zulus have a Mozambican ancestry. I'm not sure if I'm quoting you correctly, but it was along those lines. Could you elaborate on that a little kindly? Yeah. Yes, because, my ancestor imported thousands of Mozambicans in the 1800s already, most of whom didn't go back after their contract. They stayed here. I know that. They integrated into the Zulu, which is normal, actually. People do this around the world. Migration is a thing. And, but it's kind of, I'm not aware of it being, that people being aware of it, So Mozambican people were far more willing to work in the sugar industry. So they had jobs that they didn't have to compete with Zulu people, men in particular, working in that industry. So yeah. Okay, Neve, any?
I've wrapped it up just because we are kind of running over time. I don't want to kill the conversation. So if there's any, like, maybe if you want to voice and unmute and quickly ask, if you have time as well, Cedric. I don't want to
have the last word.
Any last dying questions? Because this is the opportunity. Maybe just unmute and ask.
And so please feel free to summarize. If you don't, I'm not putting pressure on you, Chief. I'm not putting pressure on you, but
I don't think I know. Yeah, I think maybe I might ruin it. Like if I try to summarize what you have presented. But for me personally, that's why I'm saying with like some of us are privileged to have had a sit down with you, because like you are very sensitive to like the to human nature and the issues that we go through in South Africa. And I think like what to be expressed or presented with everyone is actually a window showing the kind of a person that you are. So I do not want to dwell too much or not have presented, but I'm just saying, even I'm still saying just thanks for being open enough to being as honest as you are with the experience of African people in these times from then and where we find ourselves today, you know, yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Sibusiso. So my journey in photography has been one of humility. It fills me with humility because I'm in awe of the people I meet. I meet ordinary people, amazing ordinary people all the time. And I wanted to make one last correction this is Neve, the Contemporary Art Archive Project about most Zulus have Mozambican ancestry.
This was a question from earlier.
Okay, I don't mean most Zulus. Most Zulus don't have. I meant along the north coast, from Durban to pretty much where I am, and not most of that either. But there are many that have Mozambican ancestry.
Sure.
Thank
All
you,
right, guys.
thank you, Neve and the Contemporary Archive Project for this opportunity. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to our two archiving projects, the African Documentary Photographers Archiving Initiative and the Contemporary Archive Project, to having future collaborations. I think there is scope for us to do so. Thank you.